found all the people that were on Katie's boat, y'all. Shout out to the real Jada J that turned me on to this picture. And as y'all can see, we've got a match with the necklace and the swimsuit. Think I busted out my glasses and red lipstick just for the swimsuit? Nah.
Here's what happened. They killed Nolan Wells on the boat. They covered him up with the life jackets. They all knew he was on the boat. They just laid him on the back of the boat and got towed in part of the way. Then they got their boat running and they got on in. And when they got in, they couldn't figure out where they were going to put him or what they were going to do. So they dropped everybody off. Then they went back out to the island that the GPS doesn't show, but they did because they disconnected it, okay? And none of them had their phones with them when they went back. So there wasn't any trace of them going back. And they dumped the body. They came back, took the boat out of the water, then went over there at 3 a.m. and washed the boat, thinking washing the boat would get all the DNA and everything off the boat. That's what they did. Now I'm telling you, the stories are unbelievable at this point. You can't make this up. You know, first, it was about leaving the island. Well, that one blew up. Found out 2 people were at the island, saw him. Then, the Coast Guard, Coast Guard call, CETO call. Nolan, oh my God, Nolan, get up. They heard that. Can't make it up.
Uh-oh. What do we have here, y'all? What do we owe? That's Nolan right there, y'all. That's Nolan right there. I'm trying to do it slow for y'all. This one of them breeze by. You know how they do the little boomerang thing on Instagram and all. It's one of those. Y'all see that? So I want y'all to pay attention to see everybody. I'm gonna see who that is in the front. Y'all see this? That's Nolan. That is Nolan.
Attorneys representing Wells's family have served subpoenas to TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram to preserve and hand over digital evidence, including private messages, location data, deleted posts, and video footage connected to the day of the incident. That is not a small ask. That is a sweeping demand for digital reconstruction, private messages, location data, deleted posts, video footage. The family wants information from Nolan Wells' Snapchat, WhatsApp, TikTok, Life360, and Meta accounts. Life360 is a location tracking app. Think about why that matters. If anyone in that group had Life360 running on July 4th, there may be GPS breadcrumbs that show exactly where every phone was, at every moment, on that island, and off it. Those letters instructed recipients to preserve all evidence in their possession in its original, unaltered form. They also directed recipients to suspend any automatic deletion or overwrite functions that could erase potential evidence. That second instruction is critical because Snapchat has automatic deletion built into the platform. It is literally designed to make things disappear. So the first thing the legal team had to do was stop the clock before anything else could be wiped. By subpoenaing the tech giants, the family's legal team aims to recover crucial digital footprints that could shed light on what transpired before, during, and immediately after the boat trip. Before, during, and after. 3 windows. Any one of them could change what we think we know. Now here is where it gets technically significant, and I want you to pay attention to this part, because this is where an expert changes the shape of the conversation. News Nation's Brian Enton spoke with retired FBI agent Kieran Ramsey, who said investigators may be able to recover several layers of data from the 18-year-old Snapchat account, even if information was deleted. Several layers. That phrase is doing a lot of work, so let's unpack it. When you delete something on Snapchat, you are not erasing it from existence. You are removing it from your visible interface. But Snapchat's servers, the actual servers where the data lives, those are a different story. Snapchat has its own retention policies, and when a legal subpoena lands, those platforms are required by law to hand over what they have, even data the user thought was gone. That is what retired FBI agent Ramsey is pointing at. The idea that what Nolan's family found when they looked at that phone may be only one layer of what actually exists: the Snapchat servers, the metadata, the timestamps, the IP logs showing when accounts were accessed and from where. That's the data the subpoenas are going after. And here is the thing that should make you stop. If the data is already gone from the phone, but Snapchat's servers still have it, then you are looking at two different pictures. What was shown to the world and what actually happened, those are not the same thing. Attorney Crump described what he called an honest initial conversation with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, during which they also agreed to have a mutual inspection of Wells's cell phone. Mutual inspection. That's an important phrase. That means both sides, the family's team and the prosecution, will look at that phone together. Neither side gets to control what gets seen. That agreement matters because it means whatever is on that device or whatever is not on it, both sides will be seeing the same thing at the same time. Now, Ben Crump also made a separate announcement that has received almost no attention, and it should. He stated publicly that his team has the audio from the call made to Cito by a teen on the boat, and they are working with expert audio engineers to review the entire call. Sit with that for a second. The family's legal team has the audio. They have brought in engineers, not just to listen to the call, but to analyze it. There is a difference between listening and analyzing. Analyzing means they are looking at what is said, what is not said, the tone, the pacing, whether the call sounds like someone reporting an accident or someone reporting a story they prepared. Whether those engineers find something or don't find something is a question that remains open, but the fact that Crump announced it publicly means he believes the audio is relevant and that it will become part of what gets presented to the grand jury. Now, let's talk about that grand jury, because this is where the legal status of the case actually stands. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump said at a news conference that the investigation into Wells's death will be turned over to a grand jury once it is complete. The hope is when this is presented to the grand jury, all relevant witnesses and evidence will be presented to them so we can have a fair and impartial investigation into the death of Nolan Wells, Crump said. The district attorney has also stated that evidence will stay out of public view until the grand jury reviews it first, a move the DA says is meant to protect the integrity of the investigation. That is a double-edged decision. On one hand, keeping evidence out of the media protects a future trial from being poisoned by public opinion. On the other hand, when a family is already operating from a place of distrust, closed doors feel different from the outside looking in. Crump said Wells's family has a distrust that Mississippi law enforcement officials will conduct a fair investigation. That distrust is not abstract. It has a context, and the context has a history. The history of Mississippi is something that they don't just read about in books, but it's a lived experience for many Black Americans. Nolan was the only person of color in the image circulating with the group from that trip. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump stated publicly, "You had this 18-year-old kid who went out celebrating on the 4th of July with his friends on a boat, and tragically, they all came back, but Nolan didn't, and Nolan was the only African American in the group." That is not an accusation. That is a fact about the composition of that group, and when you place it alongside a phone, that came back empty, and a family friend who got the runaround trying to retrieve it, and an independent autopsy, that ruled cause of death as undetermined pending investigation. You start to see why the family is not accepting the accident narrative, not because they have proof of something else, but because they have questions that have not been answered, and they are using every legal tool available to get answers. The independent autopsy, commissioned by the family, and paid for by former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick, the independent autopsy is being paid for by former football player and civil rights activist Colin Kaepernick and will be conducted in Washington, D.C. by a doctor with no ties to Mississippi. That last part matters. No ties to Mississippi. The family is not just seeking a second opinion, they are seeking a second opinion from someone who cannot be pressured by local relationships or local politics. The independent autopsy ruled cause and manner of death as undetermined pending investigation. The official coroner found no immediate signs of physical injury. The independent autopsy also did not find apparent lacerations, fractures, or deep tissue injuries on Wells' body. What neither autopsy has done is close the door. Undetermined means the case stays open. It means the grand jury can still act. It means the subpoenas can still deliver. Notice this. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer stated publicly that, quote, "When you add it all together, what we see publicly seems to be an accident." The family and their attorney strongly dispute that conclusion, and here is the important thing to understand about that disagreement. Coffindaffer is working from what is publicly available. The family's legal team is working toward what is not yet public: the subpoena returns, the audio analysis, the mutual phone inspection. Those two people are not looking at the same information, which means we are not yet at the point where anyone can say definitively what happened or didn't happen. And that is the honest position to hold right now. Does this look like panic, or does it look like a plan? That is the frame we are going to take into the next section, because the behavior that happened after Nolan was left on that island is not finished being examined. Digital evidence is the key to that examination. When a retired FBI agent says there are several layers of data that can still be recovered, he is not giving false hope. He is describing how forensic digital investigation actually works, and the legal team has now served subpoenas. That put every major platform on notice. Stop deleting, stop overwriting, because what you have is now evidence. The platforms have been given court-ordered timelines to respond. When those responses come back, we will know things we don't know today. We will see the data underneath the data, the posts underneath the empty phone, the location logs underneath the story that was told. And that is where this case is going next. Ben Crump informed the public that his team obtained the viral CETO phone call and had retained audio engineers to perform a forensic audio analysis. Forensic audio analysis can do things that a normal listening session cannot. It can strip background noise, isolate voices, detect edits or cuts in a recording, identify stress patterns in speech, and in some cases, detect whether a call was made from a moving vessel or a stationary one, whether the wind patterns match what would be expected on a boat, in that weather, on that day. Think about what that means. The audio engineers are not just listening for what was said, they are listening for what the recording itself is telling them. Without words, Crump said publicly, "We have the audio from the officials, and we have retained in our consulting with some of the foremost audio engineering experts to review those audio tapes from the CETO call in its entirety." In its entirety. That phrase is deliberate, because the portion of the call that was released publicly may not be the complete picture of everything the recording contains. When you analyze something in its entirety, you are saying, we are not starting from what was given to us, we are starting from the beginning and working forward. Additionally, their team is consulting with ocean engineering experts to investigate how and where Nolan Wells' body was found, and whether it makes sense given low and high tides near Horn Island. That is the second expert track running parallel to the audio review. And it matters enormously, because if the tides on that day, in that area, would not naturally carry a body to where it was found, then the location of the body itself becomes a data point. Not just a fact, a question. Whether or not conscious tells you something, whether or not drowned tells you something, but where the body ended up, given the tides, given the time elapsed, given where he was last seen? That is a forensic geography question, and the family's team is now pursuing it with experts who do this for a living. Crump previously said that Nolan's throat, lungs, and photos from the original autopsy could help answer some of the biggest questions surrounding his death, including whether he was conscious when he entered the water. Crump added that the independent examiner could not determine whether water was present in Nolan's lungs, which could help indicate whether he drowned, and he added that even a drowning determination would not explain Nolan's condition when he entered the water, including whether he was conscious, unconscious, or forced in. Read that again. Those are three completely different scenarios, and right now, none of them can be ruled out, because the independent autopsy did not have all of Nolan's organs. The second autopsy did not have all of Nolan's organs, including his throat. Crump says his team wants to coordinate with the doctor who performed the autopsy to inspect it. The throat, that is the organ that tells you whether someone was conscious when they entered the water, whether there was a struggle before they went in, whether there are signs of compression or pressure, or injury that would not be visible anywhere else on the body. Notice this. The independent autopsy ruled cause of death undetermined, pending investigation. That is not a conclusion, that is a door being held open, because the people doing the examining did not have everything they needed to close it. That is not a small thing. That is the entire center of the medical evidence question. Now, let's talk about the subpoena that just landed, the one that almost nobody is covering the way it deserves to be covered. Wansley is also seeking CETO's training materials and written procedures for responding to reports of boats taking on water or sinking. The subpoena to Ward Marine Services also seeks calls and other communications connected to the incident, including dispatch communications and conversations involving the boat's captain, local crew, and people connected to the vessel. This is a new layer. This is no longer just what was on the phone. This is now, what did CETO's own protocols require when that call came in? And did those protocols get followed? If someone calls a maritime dispatcher and says they are sinking, there are specific things that dispatcher is required to do. There are written procedures. There is a chain of response. And the family's legal team wants to know whether that chain was followed or not. Because if a boat says it is sinking and someone is still on the island, those two facts should trigger a response, not just to the boat, but to the person left behind. And if no response was triggered for the person on the island, that is something the grand jury will want to know about. The subpoena to Ward Marine Services, that is the company that operates CETO in that area. And the family is now demanding everything, every call, every internal communication, every training document. They are not accepting the 9-minute recording as the full story. They are going upstream to find out what the full story actually is. Does this look like panic, or does it look like a plan? That is the question I want you to hold right now. Because here is the thing about panic. Panic is disorganized. Panic forgets things. Panic calls 911 and says the wrong thing. Panic leaves evidence in places nobody thought to look. A plan is different. A plan has steps. A plan knows what to delete and when. A plan knows what story to tell before the questions start. I am not telling you which one of those this is. That is what the grand jury is for. What I am telling you is that the legal team is treating the evidence as though there is a difference between the two, and they are building the record accordingly. They voiced concerns that messages may have been deleted from Wells's phone, which they tracked to a friend's house after his body was found on Horn Island. They tracked the phone to a friend's house after his body was found. That sentence has never gotten the attention it deserves. The phone belonging to an 18-year-old who was left on an island and found dead was being held at a friend's house after the body was recovered, and the family had to track it there. That is the chain of custody question, and it lives inside the subpoenas, and it will live inside the grand jury room. Now, let's talk about what the DA is doing and why it matters, because the DA in this case has made a decision that some people are reading as obstruction, and that deserves a fair and precise examination. The district attorney overseeing the investigation into the death of Mississippi teenager Nolan Wells pushed back against public pressure to release information amid the high-profile probe and promised to present a thorough case to the grand jury. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath said she is not able to publicly share information or address what has been released by others amid the investigation. She stated publicly, "I understand that a void is perceived when some are speaking publicly about a matter while others do not. I would be stepping outside the bounds of the law if I were to fill that void and share information publicly." Now, that statement can be read two different ways, and both readings are legitimate. The first reading is, a prosecutor protecting the integrity of an investigation from being tried in public before the grand jury has a chance to do its work. That is a real concern. That is a real legal principle. Prosecutors who speak publicly about active investigations can poison jury pools, can give targets time to construct alibis, can undermine evidence that hasn't been tested yet. The second reading is, a public official in a case involving a black teenager in Mississippi who is choosing silence while the family publicly says they do not trust the process, and that second reading has a history attached to it that cannot be ignored. She also stated, with all of the public pressure being placed on my office, filling the void would only serve to get pressure off of me. Nolan deserves better. There is no pressure that can be placed on me and no force that is greater than the weight of the oath I took and my responsibility to the people I serve, whether that oath gets fulfilled in a way that the family recognizes as justice, is the question that is going to define this case, and it has not yet been answered. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has previously said convening a grand jury does not mean there is any criminality and is standard procedure for most unnatural or suspicious deaths in the county. That is an important caveat, and it needs to be said clearly. A grand jury review is not a verdict. It is not an accusation. It is a process in which a group of citizens hears evidence and decides whether there is enough to proceed to trial or not. The DA saying this goes to a grand jury. Does not mean anyone is guilty. It means the evidence will be examined by people who are not the DA's office and not the family's legal team and not social media. That is what due process actually looks like. And it is slow, and it is painful when you are the mother of that boy. Mississippi Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tindell warned that a purported toxicology report circulating on social media is fraudulent and urged the public not to spread it. The purported toxicology report from Nolan Wells, circulating through social media on various outlets, is fraudulent, Tindell wrote. Nolan's family, friends, and most importantly, Nolan himself deserve better. That statement is significant because it tells you something about the information environment this case is operating in. There are false documents circulating, fake toxicology reports, false conclusions being dressed up as fact, and being shared by millions of people who believe they are helping, but who are potentially contaminating a jury pool and handing tools to anyone who wants to dismiss the legitimate questions by pointing at the illegitimate ones. Notice this. The misinformation in this case is not neutral. When you flood the information space with fabricated documents, you make it harder for real evidence to be heard. You give officials a way to say, see, this is what the public is doing, and you distract from the actual legal fight, which is happening in court documents, in subpoenas, in expert labs, in grand jury preparation. The legal fight is not happening on social media. The legal fight is happening in the Jackson County Chancery Court and in the grand jury room that has not yet been given a date. A grand jury in Mississippi will review the circumstances around the death of Nolan Wells before the evidence is made public in the case of the black teenager whose body was found in the water off an island he had visited with white friends. But as of the latest reporting, no date has been set for when jurors will take up the matter. No date has been set. That means the family is waiting for a process that has no announced timeline, while the Snapchat servers are holding data, while the audio engineers are combing through 9 minutes of tape, while the ocean engineers are running tide calculations, while the CETO subpoena is pending, while the phone, that came back too clean, sits at the center of all of it. Nearly a month after Nolan Wells was found dead off Mississippi's Gulf Coast, investigators have completed the state's autopsy. Prosecutors are preparing to present evidence to a grand jury. Attorneys on both sides are positioning for possible civil litigation, and state officials are warning the public about fake documents circulating online. That is where the case stands, right now. Today, multiple tracks running simultaneously, none of them finished. A newly completed independent analytical review of photographs, videos, GPS coordinates, and witness accounts concludes that the available evidence still leaves a material gap in the timeline between Wells's last independently corroborated sighting and the reported departure of the boat that transported him to the island. A material gap, that phrase is legal language, and it is being used precisely. It means there is a period of time for which there is no independently verified account of what happened. The friends have a version of events, but independent corroboration, the kind that comes from digital data, from GPS logs, from Snapchat servers, from audio engineers, has not yet filled that gap. The subpoenas exist because that gap exists, and until that gap is filled, the case stays open, and the grand jury cannot make a decision based on a story. It has to make a decision based on evidence. The reward in the case has now increased to $225,000 for information leading to answers about what happened to Nolan Wells. $225,000. Reverend Al Sharpton and media mogul Tyler Perry are offering a combined $100,000. The father of Warren Hudson said he is offering an additional $50,000 for information leading to an arrest and conviction. That is not just a number, that is a community saying, we believe there is something to know, and we are putting real money behind the belief that someone, somewhere, knows what happened on that island. And that brings us to the family, because this is the moment where the weight of this story belongs. Not to the narrator, not to the legal theories, not to the subpoenas, to them. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, became emotional while describing the pain of going 27 days without talking to or hugging her son, begging anyone with information to come forward so the family can finally rest. 27 days without talking to him, without hearing his voice, without being able to ask him what happened, and not knowing whether what you are being told is the truth. That is not a legal argument. That is a mother, and she deserves more than a story that has no answers. On August 20th, 2026, what would have been Nolan's 19th birthday, a vigil was held in his honor. Think about that. His 19th birthday, a vigil instead of a celebration. His mother and his father, who buried their child, standing at an event that should have been a party, and asking the same question that everyone who has followed this case is still asking. What happened between the time Nolan was on that island and the time his phone came back with nothing on it? Hundreds of miles from Mississippi, members of the New Orleans community gathered for a second-line procession to honor Wells and call for justice. Organizer Reuben Evans said the event was intended both to celebrate Wells's life and remind his family they were not alone. They are not alone. That has been said in Chicago at the NAP convention, in Nashville at the National Urban League Conference, in New Orleans, in the streets, and in courtrooms in Jackson County, Mississippi, where the subpoenas are filed and the grand jury is waiting. Nolan Xavier Wells was born on August 19, 2007. He graduated from Ocean Springs High School in 2025. At the time of his disappearance and death, he was attending and playing football as a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He was a wide receiver. He was a kid who documented everything on his phone. He was someone who his mother says you would never catch without a camera in his hand when something good was happening. And on the 4th of July, when he was on an island with friends on a beautiful summer day, there is nothing on his phone. That is where this started, and that is where it still lives. The precise circumstances surrounding Wells's disappearance and death remain unclear. Remain unclear. Those are the official words, but the family's legal team is not accepting unclear as an ending. They are subpoenaing the platforms. They are analyzing the audio. They are calculating the tides. They are seeking the throat, the organs that were not present at the independent autopsy. They are building a record that they intend to place in front of a grand jury. and asked 12 people to look at. What those 12 people decide will either open this case further or close it, and we do not know yet which direction that goes. Here is the question we started with today, and it has not changed. Who had access to that phone? Between the island and the moment it was handed back to his family, that question has not been answered, and until it is, the case stays exactly where it is, in motion, in court, in the hands of experts and lawyers and a grand jury that has not yet been given a date. We will keep following this. Every subpoena return, every expert finding, every court filing, every development that moves this case forward or backward. We will be here because Nolan Wells deserves a record that does not disappear, the way that Snapchat content disappears, layer by layer, until someone decides to look underneath. Subscribe so you don't miss the next update, and leave your answer in the comments below. Now that you know about the phone chain of custody, the CETO audio analysis, and the tide calculations, which piece of evidence do you think the grand jury will weigh the most heavily? Tell me below.